Hi class. So one of the questions I get asked the most is, how are you going to grade our essays? And I thought I would answer that question in a short video while grading an essay to let you see what my process is like. So if you'll notice, I gave you a file to download the essay that I am looking at now, and you can look at that and read along as I grade out loud. Once I've read through the whole paper, I stop and consider it against the rubric. And as you all know, the rubric is always available for you to look at on the homepage of Canvas in the syllabus. So if you scroll down the homepage, you'll find grading rubric with designations for the A essay, the B essay, the C essay, and so on. So first, I'm noticing that the margins are not MLA formatted. They're 1.25 instead of 1 inch, and this can drastically change the length of a paper. Since we follow length requirements for papers, that's a problem. So I've made a note of that here. I do see that the heading is appropriate. There's a title and a header, so that's good. So the first thing I'm looking at now is the epigraph, the quotation at the beginning of the paper. And the first thing I notice is that it is much too long. This takes up way too much space, and also providing that much of a quotation makes it far too broad and too general. Whenever you use an epigraph at the beginning of a paper, it should be very focused and it should be very specific, and the reader should know exactly the idea that they're supposed to take from the epigraph with them into their reading of the essay. We don't know exactly what we're supposed to be focusing on here as we read the epigraph and then go into the essay. So I would recommend that you choose either one line or even just a small part of a line to put as the epigraph at the beginning of your essay if you choose to do that. And remember, you don't have to, not everybody does. So now I'm going to continue reading. And as I read, I'm noticing a few flags. So what I'm going to do is go to Google, and I'm going to type in the first few lines. And what comes up? The first hit is a scene analysis from a free essay writing website. And there's the epigraph. There's the first paragraph. And yep, there's the whole paper. At this point, it's obvious to me that this paper has been downloaded from a free essay writing website, and it is very easy for teachers to catch that because we know what to look for, and it's very easy to Google and then find these essays. This essay would receive an automatic F because it is a case of plagiarism. So, pretending that this wasn't a case of plagiarism and that I hadn't caught it so early, I'm going to continue grading so that you have an example of how the grading process would work. Of course, I chose this essay off of a free essay writing website to show you not only how easy it is for instructors to find essays that have been taken and copied from online resources, but also to show you that these essays are not necessarily the best specimens. So let's go through this essay and see what grade it would get. So as I continue reading, pretending that this is original creative student work, first I see that the novel is not italicized properly. They used quotation marks instead. I think it's unnecessary to add this phrase, a woman, in the sentence. Edna is usually clearly recognized as a woman's name in English. So what I noticed about the first paragraph is that it's summary. It is okay to begin your essay with summary, but the problem here is that we don't have any guiding statements. We don't know how to read this essay. Right now, this is an essay that's just giving us plain summary as the introduction, and the introduction is supposed to instead tell you what the essay is going to be about and what you will be arguing in the essay. So it needs, at the very least, an introductory statement that puts you in a critical stance, and then it needs a thesis statement at the end of the first paragraph or at the end of the introductory section that tells us where the essay is going. What is the essay going to be arguing? The second paragraph, once again, is largely summary with some generalization and also is incorrect. In the final sentence, they say that the reader understands that Edna at the end commits suicide and drowns herself in the sea. Many Critics believe that conclusion to be false. Edna did not commit suicide. Had they provided better context for the passage, you would see that instead Edna swims out into the ocean and becomes exhausted and is not able to muster enough strength to make it back to shore. But she is trying to make it back to shore, which means that this is not a suicide. In the third paragraph, you'll notice that they use the word pictorial. I think they mean pictorial, but I'm not sure. So always be careful of your word choice when you're writing. So here, again, the author starts out with an assertion. I do not find it to be a particularly apt assertion. I think there's a lot of problems with the word choice, like pictorial and romantic, in describing this passage. But they do go on to be a little more specific in that she makes use of adjectives and comparisons to create a vivid story. But what are they doing with this statement? Should they say that it's to catch the reader's attention? That's not enough. Of course they're wanting to catch the reader's attention. The purpose of a communication is to make the reader want to read it. What else is going on here? What's deeper? What's going on in terms of analysis? This is not analysis. They do incorporate some quotations. They use the line number instead of the page number, which is puzzling. It's a novel, therefore they should be using the page number. They say that Chopin uses metaphors to intensify the figurativeness of this passage. Again, that's not really technically correct. And incorporate a quotation. I do notice that at the end of the quotation, they put the period outside of the quotation marks, which is incorrect, and so the period should be moved inside the quotation marks after the bracket. Here they get to something interesting. They say especially the last 3 sentences are different from the whole passage. So in terms of analysis, they've found the things that are the same, and now they're noticing the things that are different, and that's really important. So let's see what they do with this. That Chopin begins the sentences with an article, the, and they share the same syntax, but they don't provide how this becomes different from the previous, and so we're just having to take their word for it that this is what's actually happening, and that's not enough. You have to provide the evidence, so you have to show the other sentences and how they were different, and then you have to show the new sentences and how they're doing this thing that makes them more important, and how they follow this syntax, and how they begin with a certain word and repetition. I think that they might be onto something there, but they didn't follow through with their assertion, and they certainly didn't follow through with their analysis of the evidence for that assertion. Okay, now they've skipped to another idea, which is using the third-person narrator. So again, we seem to just see a bunch of paragraphs strung together with no real fluidity of thought or development of ideas. They do notice a shift from the omniscient to the limited point of view towards the middle of the passage. That's an important thing to notice and to observe, but again, we don't get any analysis. We don't get any useful analysis from that. So they've picked up on something and then dropped it. Again, we abruptly change to another idea, which is the bathing suit as a simile. So the transitions in this paper are not really working as they should, or actually they're not there at all. Typo with F following 6. They're claiming that Edna has reached the aim of her journey, which is both awkward sentence structure and again an incorrect reading. And this leads them to the incorrect assumption that suicide was Edna's aim in going swimming that day. At the end of the paper, they seem to flip-flop and say that Chopin leaves it open whether Edna drowned accidentally or intentionally. So of course an accidental drowning is not suicide, and they call this a clever solution since suicide was as prescribed as being an independent woman by a 19th century society, and that sentence just doesn't even make sense. And we've come to the end of the essay. We see that there is a works cited page, however there's only one work, so it should be work cited. And that is an incomplete citation and incorrectly formatted. Now that I have read through the paper, I'm going to now turn back to the rubric and begin asking myself some questions. First, did this essay demonstrate the writer's ability to address rhetorical situations in innovative, creative, and perceptive ways? No. So I'll move on to B. Did this essay demonstrate the writer's ability to address the rhetorical situation beyond mere competency? No. C. The C essay demonstrates the writer's ability to address the rhetorical situation competently. Was this paper competent? No. The D essay indicates the writer's ability to address rhetorical situations somewhat competently, but the writing contains weaknesses and/or errors. Okay, that's sounding more like what we're dealing with here, but let's read the description for the F essay just in case. The F essay fails to address the assignment or contains weaknesses in one or more of the following ways. There is little or no awareness of the rhetorical situation or purpose. There is no support. The essay is unorganized and logically flawed. There is no sense of tone or voice. The sentence structure is very difficult to read or inappropriate. There are substantial errors in grammar and usage. So again, to get an F on this paper, it has to contain weaknesses in one or more of the following ways. So is there little or no awareness of the rhetorical situation or purpose? I think this essay does evidence an awareness of the rhetorical situation or purpose. There is no support. And they did provide support. They didn't do a very good job of pulling it out and of analyzing it properly, but they did provide support. The essay is unorganized and logically flawed. The essay does follow a certain amount of organization. Again, the transitions are not there, and the fluidity of ideas is not there, but it does still follow a beginning, middle, and end, and so there is some sense of organization there. Is it logically flawed? I found there to be significant problems with the students' reading of the passages, but I did not find any logical flaws, perhaps with the exception of the way they flip-flopped at the end of the essay and went on to defeat their own thesis, if it could be called a thesis, because they never actually stated a thesis. So I'm going to say that there was a sense of tone and voice. The sentence structure was readable and fairly appropriate, and there were not substantial errors in grammar and usage. So I'm going to say that this is not an F essay. So let's go back up to the D essay. The D essay indicates the writer's ability to address rhetorical situations somewhat competently, and there is a sense of somewhat competence in this essay. But the writing contains weaknesses and/or errors that mark it as less than what is expected in one or more of the following ways. And this is a correct way to describe this essay. The purpose is too confused or too general. So again, as I said at the beginning of my reading, there is no thesis. Therefore, the purpose of the paper is not clear to the reader. And as they move through the paper, that thesis never becomes clear. Instead, they hop from one idea to the next. The support offered is vague, unconvincing, inaccurate, irrelevant, or too narrow in focus. Again, that is an apt description of the type of evidence that was used in this essay and the way that it was used. So it's vague, it's unconvincing, it was in places inaccurate, or too narrow. The organization is confusing or unsuccessful. And that is true for this essay as well. Instead of beginning with a clearly defined introductory paragraph followed by body paragraphs that supported the thesis, we received a very long epigraph, an introductory paragraph that consisted of nothing but summary, and then different paragraphs strung together but with no connection. The style, voice, or tone is inconsistent or inappropriate. I wouldn't say that the voice is inappropriate. It is a bit inconsistent for an academic paper. The sentence structure is difficult to read or inappropriate. Not all of the sentence structure was difficult to read, but as in the last sentence of the essay, which was very difficult to understand and perhaps not understandable at all, it was inappropriate. Numerous mechanical and grammatical errors hinder the reader's ability to understand the text, and as you saw me reading through, you heard me noting numerous mechanical errors and occasionally grammatical errors. Okay, so this is a D essay. I grade on a numerical scale, which means that I would then go and decide how high of this is a D. How high of a D is this? How low of a D is this? Considering the very long epigraph, that adjusting the margins was the only way to make it hit the page count, one line onto page 4, it really did not hit the minimum length requirement. The fact that it had no thesis, it is consisted of many incorrect or incomplete readings of the text. I would call this a low D, so I'm going to assign it a 62. I hope that this gives you some insight into how the grading process goes, as well as the things that you need to work on for your own analytical essay.